Welcome all. My name is Diane Challinor of Articino, and today I'm very pleased to interview J.A. Wells, author of The Merry Millionaire duology. Over the last few years, John and I have shared many delightful chats over coffee. He's mesmerised me, sharing story after story. Many times I had to ask, "Is that true?" And he'd say, "No, not that part, but this part is." Then off he'd go on several tangents of intriguing stories, peppered with historical facts and fictional characters. I became so intrigued with his stories that I felt it was such a shame that others couldn't delight in his entertaining company. So here we are today, doing something I'd hope he'd agree to, that is, talking about his books via a video, sharing his buoyant conversation with an audience made up of more than one person. I'd like to introduce you to J.A. Wells.
Well, thank you very much, Di. Thank you for inviting me here to talk about my latest novel, The Merry Millionaire.
The first thing I'd like to talk to you about and have you share with everyone is the delights that you've experienced just recently with publishing your first novel and the fact that they're selling.
They certainly are, Diane, and I'm thrilled to bits, as you can imagine. It's been a long process, 2 years since I actually finished The Merry Millionaire, but I have learned a great deal in the process of editing and proofing. So hopefully my next two novels, which is the Dara Dara saga, will not take as long to hit the cyber shelves. I feel exuberated. There's been many things in my life that I have been lucky enough to be able to do. First of all, I was an actor, an artist now as an artist, and now as a writer, I feel that all my boats have come in first. It's sort of a magnificent feeling to be able to know that finally my work is able to be out there and to be read by people, and hopefully they'll enjoy the joy that I've experienced over the 13 years now that I've been writing.
The next thing I'm dying to ask you is, where did your love of storytelling come from? You seem to be a natural at it. What was the source of it?
The source of my storytelling, I've always been a storyteller. From when I was in my teens, I would always find quirky things that would happen in my life, and I found that I could entertain people by telling them the story and maybe embellishing things a little bit to just give it a little bit of a comedic edge. I've always been fascinated with characters, with different characters. At school, I was an actor at school. It was my principal love, and I was a character actor. So basically, when I told stories, I became the characters that I was describing. So really, this naturally leads to me creating characters in my novels that I can jump into their skin, and that is my love of characterization.
Your book crosses over several genres, being historical fiction and gay literature. Could you talk a little bit about that so that we could get a clearer view?
Subtext.
Well, it's definitely gay literature, but it's also historical. Historical, it's a viewpoint. The Merry Millionaire, he's an extraordinary, eccentric character who you would have regarded in 1935 as what was called a bohemian, which was basically a code word for gay. And he is the most magnificent character. He jaunts through his life with gay abandon. He influences other people's lives enormously. And my other character is the reflection of this man. And they have a wonderful time going on mercy missions to Egypt. We travel to the most magnificent hotels, famous Egyptian landmarks, archaeological sites. It is. It's historical fiction in a way that we're dealing with events of the time. When the characters are about their lives, certain things are happening in the world. And Ron, who's the Merry Millionaire, he basically comments on what he reads in the Times. He's an avid reader of the Times. So he basically comments throughout the book on various events that are happening. The locations that they go to during the story are also historically relevant, because a lot of these buildings, these hotels, no longer exist. So for instance, Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo, a magnificent hotel, beautiful hotel, no longer exists. It was burnt to the ground in 1953 when Nasser took over Cairo, took over Egypt. Excuse me. It's their lives and how they live their lives in 1935 and 92 to 1937, in that time. It was illegal to be gay, and they had to live their lives covertly. But at the same time, they wanted to enjoy themselves. And they were fortunate enough, well, one of them was unfortunate enough to use his influence and money to live a wonderfully exciting life. And it's this life, just over that period of time, that I basically cover in the story.
One of the things I know is that often when an author has written a book, he's had a particular actor in mind or person that he knows. Is there anyone in particular that you could see in your mind's eye when you were writing this book?
Certainly. As soon as I realised the character and decided that he was tall, he was rather large in terms of build or weight, and he was in his 40s, late 40s, balding. Not that this particular character is balding. He had an acerbic wit. Immediately I knew my character would be magnificently played by Stephen Fry. He was in the back of my mind the whole time as I was writing, and when I envisaged them travelling on donkeys to the tomb of Tutmosis III, when I envisaged him lying in the garden of the Cataract Hotel, watching two young chaps swimming in the swimming pool, Stephen Fry was in my mind the whole time.
When I was reading The Merry Millionaire, there were so many wonderful places, particularly Egypt, which is the large focus of the book, and there's Norway, and there's the UK, and when I read about the trip to the tombs and learned about the desert, it seemed as though you must have been there. Have you ever been to Egypt or Norway or the places that you mention in your book?
Never. I needed to know. I knew the characters were going there. I knew about the cruise to Norway. So I had to do an immense amount of research. But nowadays, with the wonderful internet, Google Earth, Google Images, I was able to find fabulous photographs, maps, little bits of snippets of newsreel that would basically give me the background for the journeys that these two characters took. It was an adventure for me to basically discover these places. I knew it was important that I could take the characters down certain streets in Cairo. The problem was that in Cairo now, the streets have all been changed. The names of all the streets have been changed by various presidents that have come along since the days of King Fahd and King Farouk. I was so lucky to come across a wonderful map of Cairo dated 1933. So I could have Ron and Mervyn travelling down Ibrahim Pasha Street from the Shepherd's Hotel to go across Imbaba Bridge, to go across to Gezira Island. a wonderful way, and I could take them down roads and sharias, as they called them in Cairo in those days. And I knew where I was going, and I knew that anyone who was reading the story would be therefore convinced that I knew where I was going, and that was really very important.
How much of the book is based on true life events?
My two main protagonists in The Merry Millionaire are both fictitious, but I've placed them in Cairo and I've placed them in Norway at a certain time. Around about between January and March 1937, they were in Egypt. And events happened in Egypt and characters were abounded in Egypt that were fascinating. And I have made them in my story interweave with the lives of Mervyn and Ron. For instance, Lee Miller, the fabulous Lee Miller, happened in March 1937 to invade the male bastion of the Long Bar at Shepherd's Hotel with her sister-in-law, Maffy. Now, couldn't Ron and Mervyn have been in the Long Bar of the Shepherd's Hotel on that evening? Couldn't they have seen and experienced Maffy and Lee Miller romping towards the bar to try and be served by Joe Shillian, who was the wonderful Canadian barman at the Shepherd's Hotel at the time? Might Ron have met Lee Miller and enjoyed a conversation with her? And then might Mervyn and Ron be invited to escort Lee and Maffy to a party at Baron Empaine's palace? This was the wonderful way that my story was taking me, my imagination was taking me.
I'd like to have a few moments to discuss your writing process because I find it fascinating. Do you have a special time of the day to write? And do you write on a typewriter, computer, or longhand, and why?
Every moment of the day, if I'm possibly anywhere, I'm writing. If I'm not teaching, I travel a lot on public transport, on trains, on buses, and that's where I like to write. I feel I'm isolated, even though I'm surrounded by people, and I'm very focused. I feel focused, and the story begins to evolve in my mind and tells me and takes me on its own way. Basically, I allow the story to take me on a journey and not me trying to push it on a journey. I allow the plot to evolve itself because in that way, it's so exciting. You just don't know where the story is going to go. And characters walk into the story that you might have had in the back of your mind, and suddenly a man walks into the room and says, "Good afternoon, my name is so-and-so, so-and-so," and you think, well, where's he come from? But of course, he then becomes exciting and he moves the story on. So it's such a creative process, and I never start with a plot outline. I write in freehand. I write in exercise books. I find freehand is easy. There's an element of flow that you can get writing in freehand. The brain is working, the hand is working. If I'm sat in front of a typewriter, it just doesn't happen, or a word processor, or whichever, or a PC. I do all that 4 o'clock in the morning. I wake up early, I go onto the PC, and basically I type up everything that I'd written in freehand the day before. And in that way, I'm editing it's my first edit, basically, out of the freehand onto Word. If I was talking to my younger self, I would probably say, get that exercise book out, mate. Get a pen, get a pencil, and start writing. But then again, I was very lucky, and I was given a story to write. I've been given 3 stories to write. So I've been very lucky.
And what's next for you, John?
What's next for me? Well, I have two novels, basically a duology, another duology called the Daradara Saga. The first one is called Furlough, and the second one is called the Daradara Saga is a historical novel set between 1795 and 1842, and we travel to colonial Australia, having begun the novel in Regency England. It's a mystery, a romantic mystery. I was really lucky to find out that I too, like most Australians, have a convict ancestor. And it's his life that we read about in my next novel, the Daradara Saga. He lived, and a lot of the characters in the story also lived. So it was my delight to be able to put flesh on old bones, as they say, bring these people to life and go with them on their journey, basically.
So how can readers discover more about you and your books?
Well, I have a blog, I have a website, I have a Facebook page. You can also find me on Twitter.
I'm as pleased as punch that we've been able to share John's buoyant conversation with an audience of more than one today. Thank you, John, for your books and your entertaining self.
Thank you, Diane. It's been a pleasure.